The dust cloud rising on the horizon told Zara Vaughn that someone was coming fast. But she had more pressing problems than curious strangers as her mare stumbled again, and finally refused to take another step on that scorching August afternoon in 1878. She dismounted carefully, her legs unsteady after hours in the saddle, and examined Daisy's left front hoof with growing dread. The mare had picked up a stone somewhere between Independence, Missouri, and wherever this God-forsaken stretch of prairie existed, and now the hoof showed unmistakable signs of heat and swelling. "Easy, girl. I know it hurts," Zara whispered, stroking the mare's neck while her mind raced through increasingly grim possibilities. She was at least 10 miles from the nearest town, with the sun beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon, and nothing but endless grassland in every direction. Her canteen held maybe 2 more swallows of water. Her supplies consisted of jerky and hardtack that could break teeth, and the closest thing to shelter she could see was a lone cottonwood tree about a quarter-mile to the north. The rider she had spotted was closer now, close enough that she could make out the shape of a man on a large roan horse. Zara straightened her shoulders and rested her hand on the pistol at her hip, though she had never actually shot at another human being and prayed she would not have to start today. Her father had taught her to handle firearms before he died last winter, insisting that a woman traveling alone needed every advantage she could get in this wild country. "You look like you could use some help, miss." The voice carried across the remaining distance before the horse and rider fully came into view. When they did, Zara found herself looking up at a man who appeared to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that seemed too old for his face. He wore the dusty clothes of a working cowboy, all browns and grays faded from sun and use, and he sat his horse with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than on the ground. "My mare has gone lame," Zara said, deciding that honesty served her better than pretending everything was fine. "Picked up a stone somewhere back along the trail, and now the hoof is hot and swollen." The cowboy dismounted without asking permission and approached slowly, giving both Zara and her horse time to assess him. Up close, she could see the deep lines bracketing his mouth and the way his right hand moved stiffly, as though an old injury still pained him. He knelt beside Daisy and ran his hands down her leg with practiced competence, then examined the affected hoof with gentle thoroughness. "Name is Mason Hughes," he said without looking up, "and your mare has an abscess starting. She cannot carry you anywhere for at least a week, maybe more if we do not treat this properly." "A week?" Zara felt her stomach drop. "I cannot stay out here for a week. I have to reach St. Joseph by the end of the month. My aunt is expecting me, and if I do not arrive, she will think something terrible has happened." Mason finally looked up at her, and she saw something flicker in those prematurely aged eyes. Sympathy, perhaps, or recognition of a fellow soul carrying burdens too heavy for one person alone. "Something terrible has happened, miss. Your horse is lame, you are miles from anywhere, and if you try to push her, you will end up walking while she suffers needlessly. The question is what you plan to do about it." Zara wanted to argue, to insist that he was wrong and that she could somehow will her way out of this predicament through sheer determination. But her father had raised her to face facts squarely, no matter how unpleasant, and the facts were exactly as this stranger had laid them out. She took a deep breath and forced herself to think practically instead of emotionally. "What would you suggest, Mr. Hughes?" "There is a ranch about 5 miles northeast of here. Belongs to a widow named Martha Cunningham who takes in travelers sometimes. I was heading there myself when I spotted you. If you ride with me and we lead your mare slow and careful, we can reach it before full dark. Mrs. Cunningham knows horses as well as any veterinarian, and she will have poultices and herbs that can draw out that abscess. Your mare will need rest and treatment, but she should recover fully given time and proper care. Every instinct Zara possessed screamed warnings about trusting strange men in the middle of nowhere. She had heard too many stories about women who disappeared on the frontier, found weeks or months later if they were found at all. But she had also heard stories about stubborn fools who refused help and died of exposure or thirst within sight of salvation. Mason Hughes looked exhausted and moved like someone carrying old pain, not like the villains in cautionary tales. "I am Zara Vaughn," she said, making her decision, "and I would appreciate the help getting to Mrs. Cunningham's ranch." Something that might have been relief crossed Mason's weathered features. He stood and gathered Daisy's reins with the same gentle competence he had shown examining her hoof. "I will walk and lead your mare. You take my horse. Copper here is steady as they come and will not give you any trouble." "I can walk," Zara protested. "She is my horse and my problem. Miss Vaughn, I have been in the saddle since before dawn and my legs could use the stretch. Besides, you are wearing a riding skirt that will tangle around your ankles after the first mile, while I have boots made for walking. This is not about chivalry or thinking you cannot handle hardship. This is about getting to shelter before dark in the most efficient way possible." Zara opened her mouth to argue further, then recognized the solid logic in his words. Her pride would not keep her warm if they failed to reach the ranch before nightfall, and Daisy needed help as quickly as possible. She swallowed her objections and allowed Mason to help her mount the roan gelding, which stood patiently as though accustomed to carrying different riders. They set out across the prairie with the sun slowly sinking behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful under other circumstances. Mason walked with a slight hitch in his stride that became more pronounced as the miles passed, and Zara found herself studying him with growing curiosity. He was younger than she had first thought, probably no more than 26 or 27, but he carried himself like someone who had lived through more than his years should contain. "Have you known Mrs. Cunningham long?" Zara asked, partly to break the silence and partly because she wanted to learn more about the woman who would be hosting her for the next week. "About 4 years now. I worked her ranch one summer after her husband passed, helping get the cattle to market and the horses broken for sale. She is fair and honest, which is rarer than it should be in this country. You will be safe there, Miss Vaughn. I give you my word on that." The way he said it, with such quiet certainty, made Zara believe him. They walked on in companionable silence for a while, with only the sound of horses' hooves and the endless prairie wind for company. Zara found herself thinking about the strange turns life could take. 2 months ago, she had been living in Philadelphia, working as a seamstress and mourning her father's death. Then Aunt Judith's letter had arrived, offering a home in Missouri and the chance to start fresh somewhere new. The journey west had been long and difficult, filled with delays and detours, but Zara had felt like she was finally moving towards something instead of running away from grief. Now here she was, stranded in the middle of nowhere with a lame horse and relying on the kindness of strangers. If her friends back east could see her now, they would say it proved all their warnings about the dangerous frontier. Zara preferred to think it proved that life was unpredictable, and the only thing that mattered was how you responded to unexpected challenges. "You are traveling alone." Mason's question interrupted her thoughts. "I am. My father died last winter, and I have no other family except an aunt in St. Joseph. She invited me to come live with her and help run her boarding house." That is a long journey for a woman alone. Zara bristled slightly at the implied criticism. I can handle myself, Mr. Hughes. I made it all the way from Philadelphia without incident until today. I did not mean to suggest otherwise, Mason said mildly. I was thinking that it takes courage to leave everything familiar and start over somewhere new. Not everyone has that kind of strength. The unexpected compliment caught Zara off guard. She had grown accustomed to men either dismissing her capabilities or making crude suggestions about what a woman alone might be willing to do for help. Mason Hughes did neither, and that made him unusual in her experience. "What about you?" she asked. "Where are you coming from and where are you going?" Mason was quiet for so long that Zara thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice had gone flat and distant, as though he was reporting facts about a stranger rather than his own life. "I have been working ranches between here and Kansas for the past 3 years. Before that, I rode with a cattle outfit driving herds north. Before that does not matter anymore." The words held a weight of untold stories, of things Mason clearly had no intention of sharing with a woman he had just met. Zara recognized the boundaries he was setting and decided not to push. Everyone had a right to their secrets, especially out here where people often came west specifically to leave their pasts behind. The sun had nearly touched the horizon when buildings finally appeared in the distance. The Cunningham Ranch consisted of a sturdy 2-story house, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals that currently held about a dozen horses. Smoke rose from the chimney, promising warmth and food, and Zara felt some of the tension she had been carrying all afternoon finally ease. A woman emerged from the house as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. She appeared to be in her 50s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, and the kind of face that looked like it smiled often but could turn hard as granite when circumstances required. She took in the scene with a single comprehensive glance, then hurried forward. "Mason Hughes, what have you dragged in this time?" Her voice held affection rather than criticism. "Mrs. Cunningham, this is Miss Zara Vaughn. Her mare picked up a stone and has developed an abscess. I hoped you might have room for an unexpected guest while the horse heals." Martha Cunningham turned her sharp gaze on Zara, who resisted the urge to fidget under that assessing stare. Whatever the older woman saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded briskly and gestured toward the barn. "Get that mare into a stall and off her feet. I will fetch my medicines and take a look at that hoof. Miss Vaughn, you come with me to the house once the horses are settled. You look half dead on your feet, and I have stew that needs eating." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Mason led Daisy into the barn while Martha examined the injured hoof with the same competent thoroughness Mason had shown earlier. She made thoughtful humming sounds, then mixed a poultice from various herbs and clay that she packed around the abscess before wrapping the hoof carefully. "She will be sore for a few days, but this should draw out the infection," Martha said, straightening up with a slight groan. "Keep her stall clean and change this poultice twice a day. No riding for at least a week, and even then we will need to see how she is healing before you put weight on her again." Zara nodded, swallowing against the tightness in her throat. A week's delay meant her aunt would worry, might even send someone looking for her, but there was no help for it. Daisy needed to heal, and pushing her injured would only make matters worse. Martha seemed to sense her distress because she reached out and patted Zara's shoulder with surprising gentleness. "Things happen, girl. Animals get hurt, plans change, and life refuses to follow our schedules. The only thing to do is adapt and make the best of it. Now come eat something before you fall over." The ranch house interior was warm and welcoming, with furniture that showed years of use but also careful maintenance. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all at once, with a large fireplace providing both heat and cooking surface. Martha ladled thick stew into bowls while Mason washed up at the basin near the door, and Zara found herself seated at a real table for the first time in days. "So you are heading to St. Joseph," Martha said as they ate. It was not quite a question, but Zara recognized the invitation to elaborate. "My aunt runs a boarding house there. She offered me work and a place to stay after my father passed. I have been traveling for almost 3 weeks now, and I was hoping to arrive by month's end." "Judith Vaughn," Martha's eyebrows rose. "Tall woman, sharp tongue but a good heart. You know her. Met her a few times when I went into St. Joseph for supplies." She spoke highly of a niece back east who might be joining her. "I suppose that would be you." The world suddenly felt smaller and more connected. Zara had been thinking of herself as a stranger in a strange land, but here was proof that people knew each other, that communities existed even spread across these vast distances. The realization was oddly comforting. "I will send word to your aunt tomorrow," Martha continued. "My hired hand is riding into town for supplies, and he can stop at her boarding house to let her know you have been delayed but are safe. That way she will not worry unnecessarily." Gratitude washed over Zara so suddenly that she had to blink back tears. "Thank you, Mrs. Cunningham. That is extraordinarily kind." "Just Martha, girl. And it is not kindness, just common sense. No point in having people worry when a simple message can ease their minds." They finished the meal in comfortable silence, and Zara found her exhaustion catching up with her now that she was safe and fed. Martha showed her to a small but clean bedroom on the second floor, with a real bed and fresh linens that felt like impossible luxury after weeks of uncertain accommodations. "Sleep as late as you need," Martha said. "Tomorrow you can help around the ranch to earn your keep. I assume you are not afraid of hard work." "Not at all," Zara assured her. "I am grateful for the hospitality and happy to help however I can." After Martha left, Zara stood at the window and looked out over the darkening prairie. Somewhere out there was the life she had planned, the future she had been moving toward with such determination. But tonight she was here, in this unexpected place with these unexpected people, and she would have to trust that things would work out as they were meant to. She thought about Mason Hughes, about the way he moved through pain without complaint and the shadows that lived behind his eyes. She wondered what had put them there, and why a man so young seemed so weary. Then she reminded herself that it was none of her business, and she had her own concerns to occupy her thoughts. But as she drifted off to sleep in that unfamiliar bed, it was Mason's face she saw in her mind, and the way his expression had softened when he spoke about Martha Cunningham's kindness. Morning came with rooster crow, and the smell of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Zara dressed quickly in her most practical clothes and made her way downstairs to find Martha already busy with breakfast and Mason nowhere in sight. "He is out checking the morning chores," Martha said before Zara could ask. "That man cannot sit still for more than a minute, always has to be doing something. I think work is the only thing that keeps his thoughts from eating him alive." The blunt observation surprised Zara, though it aligned with her own impressions from yesterday. "He seems to carry a lot of weight. More than any man should have to bear alone," Martha agreed. "But he keeps it all locked up tight and will not let anyone close enough to help lighten the load. I have tried, Lord knows, but Mason Hughes is about the most stubborn man I ever met when it comes to accepting comfort." Zara helped Martha prepare breakfast, falling easily into the rhythm of kitchen work that reminded her of cooking with her father. They were setting the table when Mason came in, bringing cold morning air and the smell of horses with him. He nodded to both women but said nothing, just washed up and took his seat with the economy of movement that characterized everything he did. "Miss Vaughn is going to be staying with us for at least a week while her mare heals," Martha said as she passed plates of eggs and biscuits. "I figured she could help me in the garden and with some of the household chores, but maybe you could use an extra pair of hands with the horses too." Mason looked up, meeting Zara's eyes directly for the first time that morning. "Do you know your way around horses beyond just riding them?" "My father kept 2 horses for his delivery wagon. I helped care for them from the time I was old enough to carry a bucket of water. I can clean stalls, groom, and handle basic care. I do not know much about breaking or training, but I am willing to learn." Something that might have been approval flickered across Mason's features. "I am working with a 3-year-old gelding that Mrs. Cunningham wants ready for sale by fall. He has good lines but needs patient handling. You could help with the groundwork if you are interested." "I would like that," Zara said, surprised to realize she meant it. The idea of spending the next week simply waiting for her horse to heal had seemed unbearable. But if she could stay busy and learn something useful, the time might pass more quickly. After breakfast, Martha sent her hired hand off to town with a letter for Aunt Judith, then put Zara to work helping harvest vegetables from the garden. The work was hot and backbreaking, but Zara found satisfaction in the simple physical labor. It gave her hands something to do and kept her mind from dwelling on delays and disrupted plans. Around midday, Martha declared them both in need of a break, and they retreated to the shade of the porch with cool water and leftover biscuits. From their vantage point, they could see the corral where Mason worked with a young bay gelding, his movements patient and unhurried despite the horse's nervous energy. "He is good with them," Zara observed. "The horses, I mean. They trust him." "Animals always know when someone understands them," Martha said. "Mason has a gift for it, probably because he knows what it is like to be hurt and scared. He can sense when to push and when to give space, when to demand and when to comfort. It is a rare skill." Zara watched as Mason stroked the gelding's neck, speaking too quietly for the words to carry but his tone soothing and calm. The horse's ears flicked forward, attention focused entirely on the man beside him, and some of the tension went out of the animal's frame. "How did he get hurt?" The question slipped out before Zara could stop it, and she immediately felt guilty for asking. "I am sorry, that is not my business." Martha was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. "He came here 3 years ago looking like death warmed over, with a bullet wound in his shoulder that had festered, and a look in his eyes like he had seen hell itself. I nursed him back to health as best I could, and he worked that whole summer to repay what he considered a debt. He has come back every year since, staying a few months when ranch work is slow elsewhere. What happened to him? Before he came here, I mean. That is his story to tell, not mine, but I will say this. Mason Hughes is a good man who has made some hard choices and paid prices that would break lesser people. Whatever shadows he carries, he earned them honestly, and he is doing his best to find his way back to the light. That is all any of us can do." The words settled into Zara's chest like stones, heavy with meaning she did not fully understand. She thought about her own grief, about the hollow place her father's death had left inside her. Was that not its own kind of shadow, its own wound that she kept hidden from the world? Maybe everyone carried scars invisible to others, and the real measure of a person was how they chose to live despite the hurt. After lunch, Mason approached and asked if Zara wanted to help with the gelding. She followed him to the corral, where the bay horse watched their approach with alert wariness. "His name is Thunder, which is about the most obvious name for a horse I ever heard, but Martha's grandson named him, and she cannot bring herself to change it," Mason said, and Zara caught the hint of amusement in his voice. "He has good instincts but startles easy. Someone probably handled him rough when he was younger, and now he expects every person to hurt him. How do you teach him differently? Patience, consistency, never asking more than he can give, but always asking enough that he has to try. Same way you help any broken thing heal, I suppose." Mason demonstrated how to approach the horse, moving slowly and giving Thunder time to see and smell, and decide whether to accept or retreat. When the gelding finally allowed Mason to stroke his shoulder, the cowboy's face transformed into something almost peaceful, as though he found relief in this simple act of gentling a frightened animal. "Your turn," Mason said, stepping back. "Remember, no sudden movements. Let him come to you as much as you go to him. It is a conversation, not a demand." Zara moved forward carefully, her hand extended for Thunder to investigate. The gelding's nostrils flared as he took in her scent, and she could see the conflict in his eyes between fear and curiosity. She stood perfectly still, barely breathing, and waited. When Thunder finally stretched his neck and brushed his nose against her palm, triumph surged through her chest. It was such a small thing, this moment of tentative trust, but it felt enormous in its significance. She understood suddenly why Mason spent his time gentling horses. There was healing in it, a reminder that damaged things could learn to trust again given enough patience and care. They worked with Thunder for another hour, with Mason offering quiet guidance and praise when Zara did something right. She learned to read the horse's body language, to recognize the subtle signs of relaxation and stress. By the time Martha called them in for supper, Zara felt like she had learned more about communication than any number of words could have taught her. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm after that. Mornings were for chores around the ranch and tending to Daisy's healing hoof. Afternoons belonged to working with Thunder and the other horses, with Mason teaching Zara the art of patience and observation. Evenings found them all gathered around Martha's table, sharing meals and occasional stories that revealed little pieces of who they were. Zara learned that Martha had run this ranch alone for 4 years since her husband's death, refusing to sell despite pressure from neighbors who thought a woman had no business managing such an enterprise. She learned that Mason could play harmonica with surprising skill, though he only brought out the instrument on evenings when the mood was particularly mellow. She learned that both Martha and Mason carried their own griefs and struggles, but faced each day with determination to do their best with what they had. What she did not learn was the full story behind the shadows in Mason's eyes, or the details of whatever had put that bullet wound in his shoulder. He remained unfailingly polite but distant, friendly enough during their work with the horses, but always maintaining a careful emotional distance. It should not have bothered Zara, who had her own destination and her own life waiting once Daisy healed. But she found herself increasingly curious about this man who seemed both gentle and dangerous, wounded and strong. On the 5th day of her stay, Zara went to check on Daisy early in the morning and found Mason already in the mare's stall. He was changing the poultice, his hands moving with practiced competence, and he looked up when Zara entered. "The swelling is down significantly," he said. "Another few days and she should be sound enough for light walking. You will be able to continue your journey soon." The words should have brought relief, but instead, Zara felt an unexpected pang of something she refused to name as disappointment. She had grown comfortable here, had found satisfaction in the work and the routine. More than that, she had found herself looking forward to the hours spent working alongside Mason, to the quiet moments when his careful walls came down, and she caught glimpses of the man he might be without all that protective armor. "I suppose I should be glad," she said, kneeling beside him to examine Daisy's hoof herself. "I have already imposed on Martha's hospitality for longer than is proper. Martha does not see it as an imposition. She likes having you here. Says you remind her of her daughter before she moved to California with her husband. What about you? Do you see it as an imposition?" The question came out more directly than Zara had intended, and she saw Mason's shoulders stiffen slightly. He finished securing the clean bandage around Daisy's hoof before answering, and when he did his voice was carefully neutral. "I think you are a capable woman who has handled an unfortunate situation with grace and practicality. I think you will reach your aunt and start your new life, and you will probably do well because you are not afraid of hard work or difficult circumstances." It was a politician's answer, polite and completely empty of personal feeling. Zara felt frustration rise in her chest. "That is not what I asked." Mason stood and brushed hay off his pants, still not meeting her eyes. "What do you want me to say, Miss Vaughn? That I have enjoyed teaching you about horses, that I will miss our afternoon sessions working with Thunder when you leave? Those things might be true, but they do not change anything. You have your life to live and I have mine. We are just two people who happen to cross paths for a moment." "It does not have to be just a moment," Zara said quietly. "People can become friends. People can matter to each other." Now Mason did look at her, and the raw pain in his eyes made Zara take an involuntary step back. "Friends are a luxury I cannot afford, Miss Vaughn. People who matter to me have a habit of getting hurt or worse, and I will not carry any more weight than I already do. When your horse heals, you will leave and you will forget about the cowboy who helped you when you were stranded. That is how this works. That is how it has to work." He walked out of the barn before Zara could formulate a response, leaving her standing in Daisy's stall with 100 questions burning in her chest and no answers forthcoming. She stood there for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened and what it meant. Martha found her there later, still standing in the same spot, lost in thought. The older woman took one look at Zara's face and sighed. "He pushed you away. He said people who matter to him get hurt. Martha, what happened to him? What is he running from?" Martha leaned against the stall door, her expression sad. 3 years ago, Mason was riding with a cattle outfit bringing a herd north. They ran into trouble with rustlers, and in the fight that followed, Mason's younger brother was killed. The boy was only 17, and Mason had promised their dying mother he would keep him safe. He has been carrying that guilt ever since, blaming himself for a death that was not his fault and pushing away anyone who tries to get close, because he thinks he will somehow bring them harm. The pieces fell into place with sudden, terrible clarity. The shadows in Mason's eyes, the way he held himself apart, the exhaustion that seemed to come from more than just physical labor. He was not just grieving his brother. He was punishing himself for being unable to prevent the death, for surviving when the boy he was supposed to protect had died. "That is why he works with the horses," Zara said slowly, "because they are safe to care about. They cannot die in gunfights or get caught in violence that is beyond anyone's control. He has built walls so high around himself that even kindness cannot get through," Martha agreed. "I have tried for 3 years to help him see that he is allowed to be happy, that his brother would not want him living like this. But grief and guilt are stubborn companions, and Mason holds onto them like they are the only things keeping him upright." Zara thought about her own grief, about the months after her father's death when she had moved through each day like a ghost, going through motions without feeling anything real. She remembered the moment she had decided to accept her aunt's offer, the way that decision had felt like stepping back into life after a long absence. Mason had never taken that step. He was still trapped in the moment of his brother's death, still trying to protect a memory by refusing to let anyone else matter. What if someone refused to be pushed away? Zara asked. What if someone cared about him anyway, whether he wanted them to or not? Martha's smile was sad but hopeful. Then maybe, eventually, he might start to believe he deserves that caring. But it would not be easy, Zara. Mason's walls are thick, and he has a lot of practice keeping people at a distance. Nothing worth having is ever easy, Zara said. My father used to tell me that whenever I complained about difficult tasks. She spent the rest of that day thinking about what Martha had told her and what she wanted to do about it. The logical choice was to respect Mason's clearly stated boundaries, finish her time here as the pleasant interlude it was meant to be, and continue on to St. Joseph without looking back. That was the safe choice, the sensible one. But Zara had not traveled halfway across the country to play it safe. She had come west looking for a new life, for a chance to be someone different than the quiet seamstress mourning her father in Philadelphia. Maybe that meant taking risks, even emotional ones. Maybe that meant caring about people even when they insisted you should not. That evening, when Mason played his harmonica on the porch after supper, Zara sat down beside him without asking permission. He stopped playing and looked at her warily. I know about your brother, she said quietly, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. Martha told me what happened, and I am so sorry for your loss. Mason's jaw clenched, his hands tightening around the harmonica. She had no right to tell you that. Maybe not. But I am glad she did, because now I understand why you keep pushing people away. You think if you do not let anyone close, you cannot fail to protect them. You think if you carry all that guilt and grief alone, somehow that honors your brother's memory. You do not know anything about it, Mason said, his voice tight with controlled anger. You do not know what it is like to watch someone you love die because you were not fast enough or smart enough to save them. You are right, Zara agreed. I do not know that specific pain. But I know what it is like to lose someone who meant everything to me. I know what it is like to feel like part of yourself died with them. My father was my best friend, my teacher, my entire family. When he passed last winter, I thought I would never feel whole again. Mason was silent, but he had not walked away, which Zara took as permission to continue. I spent months just going through motions, working and eating and sleeping but not really living. Then my aunt's letter came, offering me a chance at something different, and I had to decide whether I was going to stay trapped in grief or whether I was going to honor my father's memory by building the kind of life he would have wanted for me. A life with purpose and connection and maybe even happiness. It is not the same thing, Mason said, but his voice had lost its hard edge. Your father died naturally. My brother died because I was not good enough to keep him safe. Your brother died because violent men exist in this world, and sometimes bad things happen no matter how hard we try to prevent them. You cannot control everything, Mason. Nobody can. The only thing you can control is whether you let that tragedy define the rest of your life. Mason turned to look at her fully, and she saw the war playing out behind his eyes. Part of him wanted to believe her, wanted to accept the possibility of absolution. But another part, the part that had lived with guilt for 3 years, could not let go of the familiar weight. Why do you care? He asked finally. You will be gone in a few days. Why does it matter to you whether I make peace with my past? Zara considered her answer carefully, knowing that honesty was the only currency that held value between them. Because in the time I have been here, I have seen glimpses of who you really are under all those protective layers. I have seen the patience you show with frightened horses and the gentle way you handle injured animals. I have seen you laugh at Martha's terrible jokes and the skill in your hands when you play music. I have seen a good man who deserves better than the prison he has built for himself. And what about what you deserve? Mason's voice had gone soft, almost vulnerable. You deserve someone who is not carrying ghosts and grief, someone who can offer you a future instead of just broken pieces. What I deserve is the right to make my own choices about who matters to me, Zara said firmly. And I choose to care about you, Mason Hughes, whether you think that is wise or not. You helped me when my horse went lame, when I was stranded and vulnerable. Now I want to help you heal the wounds you keep hidden. Not because I think you are a project to be fixed, but because I see your worth even if you do not. Something cracked in Mason's expression, some small fissure in those thick walls. He looked away quickly, but not before Zara saw the sheen of moisture in his eyes. They sat in silence as darkness fell around them, the prairie sounds providing a soundtrack of crickets and wind. His name was Michael, Mason said finally, so quietly that Zara almost missed it. My brother. He was 17 and thought riding with a cattle outfit was the most exciting adventure imaginable. I tried to talk him out of it, told him to wait a year until he was older and more experienced. But he was stubborn, and I thought I could protect him if I kept him close. What happened? We were 3 days from Abilene when the rustlers hit us at night. It was chaos, men shouting and guns firing and cattle stampeding in every direction. I was trying to control my horse and locate Michael in all the confusion when I heard him call out. By the time I reached him, he had already been shot. I held him while he died, and the last thing he said was that he was sorry for being so much trouble. Mason's voice broke on the last word, and Zara reached out instinctively to take his hand. He did not pull away. He thought he was a burden, Mason continued. Even dying, he was apologizing, and I could not tell him that he was the best person I knew, that having him as a brother was the greatest gift of my life, because he was already gone. So I have carried those unsaid words for 3 years, along with the knowledge that I failed the one promise that mattered most. Oh, Mason, Zara squeezed his hand, her own eyes burning with tears. You did not fail him. You loved him and tried to keep him safe, and sometimes that is not enough because we live in a world where terrible things happen. But Michael knew you loved him. Brothers know that, even when the words are not spoken. How can you be sure? Because he called for you in the chaos. Because his last thought was about you, about not wanting to be a burden. That is the thought of someone who knows he is loved, who cares about the person who loves him. He knew, Mason. I promise you, he knew. Mason turned to face her, and in the dim light from the house, she could see tears tracking down his weathered face. I do not know how to let it go. The guilt, the grief. It has been part of me for so long that I do not remember who I was before. You do not have to let it go all at once, Zara said gently. Grief is not something we get over. It is something we learn to carry differently. But you do have to decide whether you are going to let it be the only thing that defines you, or whether you are going to honor Michael's memory by living the kind of life he would want for you. A life that includes joy and connection and possibility. They sat together in the darkness, hands clasped, while something fundamental shifted between them. Zara did not know what would happen next, did not know if Mason would truly let himself heal, or if he would retreat back behind his walls when morning came. But she knew that this moment mattered, that speaking Michael's name aloud and sharing the weight of that grief had been important. Eventually, Martha's voice called from inside, reminding them that morning would come early and bodies needed rest. Mason stood and helped Zara to her feet, his hand lingering in hers for just a moment longer than necessary. Thank you, he said quietly, for listening, for caring when I did not deserve it. You deserve it more than you know, Zara replied, and you are welcome. The next morning brought a subtle change in Mason's demeanor. He still maintained some distance, still held parts of himself carefully protected, but the rigid walls had developed cracks that let light through. He smiled more easily at Martha's teasing over breakfast, and asked Zara her opinion about Thunder's training with genuine interest in her answer. When they went out to work with the gelding after morning chores, Mason showed Zara how to long line the horse, standing in the center while Thunder moved in circles around her. It required trust from the horse and communication without force, the kind of patient skill that Mason excelled at teaching. "You have a gift for this," Mason said as Zara successfully guided Thunder through a change of direction. "The horses respond to you because you listen to what they are telling you instead of just imposing your will." "I had a good teacher," Zara said, pleased by the compliment. "Someone who understands that healing requires patience and trust, whether you are working with horses or people." Mason met her eyes, and she saw acknowledgement there of the parallel she was drawing. People are more complicated than horses. Maybe, but the principles are the same. Everyone, human or animal, responds better to understanding than to force. Everyone needs to feel safe before they can truly trust. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, with Thunder responding beautifully to Zara's quiet commands. The gelding had come so far in just the few days she had been working with him, his initial nervousness replaced by growing confidence. It was deeply satisfying to witness that transformation, and to know she had played a small part in making it happen. During their afternoon break, sitting in the shade of the barn with cool water and Martha's fresh bread, Mason surprised Zara by asking about her life in Philadelphia. "What made you decide to come west? Besides your aunt's invitation, I mean. You could have stayed in the city where things were familiar." Zara considered how to answer, wanting to be honest but not sure how much to reveal. "After my father died, everything in Philadelphia reminded me of him. The streets we walked together, the houses where I delivered finished sewing, even our apartment that felt too empty without his presence. I needed to be somewhere new, somewhere I could build a life that was mine instead of just the shadow of what we had together." "You think it will work?" "Starting over in a new place? I do not know yet, but I think it has to be better than staying somewhere that felt like a constant ache. At least here in this wide open country, there is room for possibility. Room to become someone different if that is what I need." Mason nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "I understand that, the need to be somewhere that does not hold every painful memory. I have been moving from place to place for 3 years, thinking that if I never stayed anywhere long enough, maybe the grief would not catch up with me. Has it worked?" "No. The grief comes along no matter where I go because I carry it inside. The only thing that changes is the scenery." "So maybe the answer is not to keep moving," Zara suggested carefully. "Maybe the answer is to find a place worth staying for, and do the hard work of learning to live with the grief instead of running from it." Mason looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Is that what you are planning to do in St. Joseph? Put down roots and build something permanent?" "I hope so. I want to help my aunt with her boarding house, become part of a community, maybe eventually have a family of my own. I want the kind of life my father wanted for me, full of meaningful work and people who matter." "You deserve all of that," Mason said quietly. "You deserve a good life, Zara." It was the first time he had used her given name instead of the formal Miss Vaughn, and the intimacy of it sent warmth spreading through her chest. She met his eyes and saw something there that made her breath catch, a vulnerability and longing that he quickly shuttered behind his usual careful control. "So do you, Mason. You deserve peace and happiness and a life that is about more than just surviving." They finished their break in charged silence, both acutely aware of the shift happening between them, but neither quite ready to name it aloud. When they returned to working with Thunder, their movements had developed a synchronization that came from growing familiarity. They anticipated each other's actions, communicated with looks and small gestures, moved through the tasks with the kind of ease that usually took much longer to develop. That evening, Martha announced that her hired hand had returned from town with supplies and news. Aunt Judith had received the message and sent a reply saying she was relieved to hear Zara was safe and in good hands. She would expect her niece to arrive whenever the horse was ready for travel, and there was no need to rush. She also sent payment for your room and board, Martha added, handing Zara an envelope. Though I told her it was not necessary since you have been helping around the ranch. Zara opened the envelope to find money and a short letter in her aunt's familiar handwriting. The note was warm and reassuring, telling Zara to take all the time she needed and not to worry about anything in St. Joseph. It also included a postscript that made Zara smile. Martha tells me a young cowboy named Mason Hughes helped you when your horse went lame. I have heard good things about that man, and I trust you are being properly supervised. My aunt seems to know everyone in Missouri, Zara commented, showing the letter to Martha. Small world out here, Martha replied with a knowing smile. People's reputations travel far, especially when those people are as decent as Mason has proven himself to be. Mason, who had been studiously ignoring the conversation while cleaning his boots by the door, looked up at the mention of his name. I would appreciate not being discussed like I am not in the room. Then stop lurking by the door and come join the conversation properly, Martha said with the kind of affectionate exasperation that came from long familiarity. Zara's aunt thinks well of you, which should please you since you are always worried about your reputation. I do not worry about my reputation, Mason protested. I just prefer to be judged on my actual character rather than assumptions or rumors. Which is a fancy way of saying you worry about your reputation. Martha shot back, then laughed at Mason's annoyed expression. Watching their easy banter, Zara felt a pang of longing for this kind of comfortable relationship, where people could tease and be teased without fear of causing real offense. It spoke to years of trust built between them, of Martha's patient erosion of Mason's walls and his gradual acceptance of her caring. It gave Zara hope that with enough time and persistence, those walls might come down for others as well. On the 7th day of her stay, Martha declared Daisy well enough for short walks around the property. The mare moved carefully at first, favoring her heeled hoof, but after a few circuits showed no signs of pain or renewed swelling. It meant Zara could begin planning her departure in earnest, resume the journey that had been interrupted by that stone on the trail. She should have felt relief or anticipation, should have been eager to finally reach her destination and start her new life. Instead, she felt a hollow dread at the thought of leaving this place and these people who had become important to her in such a short time. Especially Mason, whose guarded smiles and rare moments of vulnerability had come to mean more than Zara wanted to admit. That afternoon, working with Thunder for what might be one of the last times, Zara found herself memorizing details she knew she should not be cataloging. The way Mason's hair fell across his forehead when he bent to check the gelding's hooves. The sound of his rare laughter when Thunder did something particularly silly. The careful way he touched wounded things, whether horses or people, as though afraid his strength might accidentally cause harm. "You are quiet today," Mason observed. "Something on your mind?" "Everything," Zara wanted to say. "The fact that I do not want to leave. The way you have started to matter to me in ways I did not expect. The question of whether you feel any of this same reluctance to say goodbye. Instead, she said, I was thinking about St. Joseph, about what comes next. It feels strange to be so close to the destination I have been traveling toward for weeks and suddenly not feel ready to arrive. Mason's hand stilled in Thunder's mane. Are you having doubts about living with your aunt? No, nothing like that. I think that will be good. It is just that plans are simple when you make them from a distance. You think, I will travel west and start a new life, and it seems straightforward. You do not account for all the unexpected things that happen along the way, or the people you meet who change your perspective on what you want. What do you want, Zara? Mason's voice had gone very quiet, and when she looked at him, she saw something intense and uncertain in his expression. I want to matter, she said honestly. I want to build relationships that are real and deep. I want to take risks, even when they are scary. I want to stop living like I am afraid that caring about people means I will inevitably lose them. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Mason must have heard the echo of their earlier conversations about his own fears, because his mouth quirked in something too sad to be a real smile. Those are good things to want, he said carefully. Important things. What about you? What do you want, Mason? He was quiet for so long that Zara thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with suppressed emotion. I want to believe I deserve the things you described. I want to wake up one morning without the first thought being about Michael and what I could not save. I want to look forward instead of constantly back. And I want to be brave enough to let someone matter to me again, even though that terrifies me more than any gunfight or stampede ever did. Zara's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Someone in general or someone specific? Mason moved around Thunder to stand directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. You know the answer to that, Zara Vaughn. You have known since the first day when you looked at me and saw past all the walls I keep so carefully maintained. Then say it, Zara whispered. Be brave enough to say it out loud. I care about you, Mason said, the words coming out rough but honest. More than I should. More than is probably wise given that you are leaving for St. Joseph. And I am just a drifter with more baggage than any woman should have to tolerate. But I care about you anyway, and the thought of you leaving makes me want to do foolish things like ask you to stay or offer to come with you. Joy and anguish warred in Zara's chest. She reached up to cup Mason's face in her hands, feeling the rasp of stubble against her palms and the way he leaned into her touch like a man starving for contact. Those are not foolish things, she said. Those are honest things, important things. And I care about you too, so much that it scares me. I did not come west looking for romance or love. I thought I would spend time grieving my father and maybe eventually find someone suitable to build a practical life with. I did not expect to meet someone who made me feel this much. What do we do about it? Mason asked, his hands coming up to cover hers where they rested against his face. How do we make this work when your life is pulling you towards St. Joseph, and mine has been about never staying anywhere too long? I do not know, Zara admitted. But I think we start by being honest about what we want and then figuring out how to make it happen. Do you want this, Mason? Do you want to try building something real with me, even though it is complicated and scary? Yes, Mason said without hesitation. God help me, yes. But Zara, you need to understand what you would be getting. I am not healed yet. I still carry grief and guilt, and there will be days when the shadows pull me under. I cannot promise to be easy or simple, and I will probably disappoint you more times than I can count. I am not looking for easy or simple, Zara said firmly. I am looking for real and honest. I am looking for someone who tries, even when things are hard, someone who treats me like an equal partner instead of a delicate flower that needs constant protection. Can you be that person?" Mason's answer was to kiss her, a desperate fierce claiming that spoke of fear and hope tangled together. Zara kissed him back with equal intensity, pouring 3 years of his grief and her loneliness into the connection between them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Thunder nickered in protest at being ignored. They broke apart laughing, the tension diffused by the horse's perfect timing. Mason rested his forehead against Zara's, his hands cradling her face with heartbreaking gentleness. "I do not deserve you," he whispered. "Probably not," Zara agreed with a smile. "But you are getting me anyway if you are brave enough to accept it." "I am trying to be," Mason said. "For you, I am trying." They finished working with Thunder in a daze of new awareness, every accidental touch now electric with possibility. When they walked back to the house together, Mason took Zara's hand and did not let go, a public declaration that they were no longer simply strangers thrown together by circumstance. Martha took one look at their joined hands and clasped faces, and smiled like someone who had been expecting this development all along. "About time you two figured it out," she said matter-of-factly. "I was beginning to think you would both leave here without admitting what was obvious to everyone else." "How long have you known?" Zara asked, feeling her cheeks heat. "Since the second day, when I watched Mason look at you like you were water in a desert. That man has not let himself want anything in 3 years, and suddenly there he was, wanting so hard it showed on his face every time he looked your direction." Mason groaned and covered his face with his free hand. "Was I really that obvious? To someone who knows you as well as I do?" "Yes. But you were also stubborn about admitting it, which is entirely in character." Martha's expression softened. "I am happy for you both. You deserve this joy." That evening, after supper, Mason and Zara sat on the porch again while Martha tactfully gave them privacy. The sunset was spectacular, painting the endless prairie sky in shades of purple and gold that seemed to promise infinite possibility. "I need to be honest with you about something," Mason said, his arm around Zara's shoulders as she leaned against his side. "I do not know how to do this. Relationships, romance, any of it. The only woman I ever courted was 5 years ago, and that ended when she decided she would rather marry a banker than a cowboy. Since Michael died, I have not even tried to connect with anyone because it seemed safer to stay isolated." "I do not have much more experience than you," Zara admitted. "There was a man in Philadelphia who courted me for a few months, but he lost interest when he realized I was not going to inherit my father's business. After that, I focused on work and taking care of my father as his health declined. Romance seemed like something that happened to other people, not to me." "So we are both walking into unknown territory," Mason said. "Together," Zara added. "That is the important part. We are doing this together, which means we can figure it out as we go." Mason pressed a kiss to the top of her head, the gesture so tender that Zara felt tears prick her eyes. "What about the practical concerns? Your aunt is expecting you in St. Joseph, and you have a life waiting there. I cannot ask you to give that up for me when we have known each other barely more than a week." "You are not asking me to give anything up," Zara said, "but I do need to go to St. Joseph and explain the situation to my aunt. She is expecting me to help with the boarding house, and I owe her honesty about my plans changing." "And what are your plans?" Mason asked quietly. "What do you want our future to look like?" Zara turned to face him more fully, taking both his hands in hers. "I want to build a life with you, whatever that looks like. Maybe that means staying in this area so you can continue working ranches. Maybe it means finding a place of our own eventually. I want us to have time to know each other properly, without the pressure of having to make huge decisions immediately. What do you want? Mason's eyes were bright with emotion in the fading light. I want to stay in one place and build something lasting. I want to stop running from my grief and start living for the future instead of just surviving day to day. And I want to do all of that with you, if you are truly willing to take a chance on someone as damaged as I am. You are not damaged, Zara said fiercely. You are healing, and that is different. Healing is brave and hard and important, and I am honored that you are willing to let me be part of that process. They talked long into the night, making tentative plans and sharing dreams. Mason suggested that Zara could go to St. Joseph as planned, help her aunt get the boarding house organized for the coming season, and then return to the area if she still wanted to pursue a relationship with him. It would give them both time to be certain this connection was real and lasting, not just born from the intensity of unusual circumstances. Zara countered that she did not need time to be certain of her feelings, but she agreed that being responsible about their commitments to others was important. She would go to her aunt, explain the situation honestly, and see what options existed. Maybe Aunt Judith would understand. Maybe there would be a way to balance helping family with building a new relationship. I am going to ask Martha if she needs someone to help run this ranch permanently, Mason said. She has been managing alone for too long, and I think she would benefit from having steady help. If I stayed here, we would have a home base while we figure out the rest. That seems like a good plan, Zara agreed. Martha clearly cares about you and you work well together. It would be good for both of you. As the night deepened and the stars emerged in brilliant profusion across the clear sky, they sat together in comfortable silence. Zara marveled at how much could change in such a short time, how a person could go from being a stranger to someone essential in just a few days. It should have terrified her, this swift certainty about Mason and what she wanted with him. Instead, it felt like recognizing something that had always been waiting to happen, like finding a piece of herself she had not known was missing. The next morning, Zara tested Daisy more thoroughly and found the mare sound and ready for travel. It should have been good news, but instead it felt bittersweet, marking the end of this unexpected interlude. She helped Martha prepare breakfast, moving through the familiar tasks while trying not to think about how much she would miss this kitchen and this routine. "You are welcome back anytime," Martha said, watching Zara with knowing eyes. "I hope you understand that. This is not goodbye forever, just goodbye for now." "Thank you," Zara managed around the lump in her throat. "You have been so kind to me and I am grateful for everything you have done." "You helped that stubborn cowboy start healing his wounds," Martha replied. "That is worth more than any amount of gratitude. Just promise me you will both be happy. That is all I want for either of you." "I promise to try," Zara said. "We both will." After breakfast, Mason helped Zara prepare for her journey while she double-checked her supplies and made sure everything was securely packed. They worked in charged silence, hyper-aware of each other and the impending separation. Finally, with Daisy saddled and ready, there was nothing left to do but say goodbye. "It is only for a few weeks," Mason said, though he was holding Zara's hands like he never wanted to let go. "You will talk to your aunt, I will talk to Martha, and then we will figure out what comes next." "A few weeks," Zara repeated. "But Mason, what if she needs me to stay? What if I cannot come back as quickly as we hope?" "Then I will come to you," Mason said simply. "I am done running from the things I want, Zara. If you need to be in St. Joseph, then I will find work there. If you can come back here, even better. But I am not losing you just because geography gets complicated." Zara threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with all the fear and hope tangled in her chest. Mason held her like she was precious, his hands gentle and his kiss tender despite the desperation they both felt. "I am falling in love with you," Zara whispered against his mouth. "I know it is too soon to say that, but I need you to know." "It is not too soon when it is true," Mason replied, his voice rough with emotion. "And I am falling in love with you too, Zara Vaughn. Maybe I have been since the moment you looked at me and decided I was worth caring about." They kissed again, long and sweet, before finally forcing themselves to separate. Zara mounted Daisy while Mason held the mare's bridle, and for a moment they just looked at each other, memorizing details against the coming separation. "Be safe," Mason said. "And Zara, thank you for seeing me when I was trying so hard to stay invisible." "Thank you for helping me when I needed it most," Zara replied, "and for being brave enough to let me help you heal." She turned Daisy toward the road and rode away without looking back, knowing that if she did she might not have the strength to keep going. Behind her, Martha joined Mason on the porch, and though Zara could not hear their conversation, she imagined Martha offering comfort and perspective the way she had done so often during the past week. The miles passed slowly, with Zara's thoughts full of Mason and the uncertain future stretching ahead. She thought about his smile when he worked with thunder, about the way his hands moved with such careful gentleness, about the shadows in his eyes that were slowly being replaced by hope. She thought about Martha's kindness, and the way the older woman had created space for both of them to figure out what they needed. Most of all, she thought about the fact that sometimes help came from unexpected places, and sometimes the person you helped ended up helping you just as much. Mason had assisted her when her horse went lame, providing practical support and safe shelter. But she had helped him begin healing wounds he had kept hidden for 3 years, wounds that went deeper than any physical injury. St. Joseph appeared on the horizon 3 days later, a bustling town full of commerce and movement. Zara found her aunt's boarding house easily, following the directions from Martha's letter. Aunt Judith emerged before Zara had even fully dismounted, her face bright with relief and welcome. "Thank heavens you are safe," Judith exclaimed, pulling Zara into a fierce hug. "I got Martha's message, but I still worried. Come inside and tell me everything." Over tea and fresh bread in the boarding house kitchen, Zara explained what had happened. She talked about Daisy going lame, about Mason finding her stranded, about the week spent at Martha's ranch learning to work with horses, and discovering that sometimes the people you least expect turn out to matter most. She was honest about her growing feelings for Mason and the possibility that her plans might need adjustment. Judith listened without interrupting, her sharp eyes assessing and thoughtful. When Zara finally fell silent, uncertain what response to expect, her aunt surprised her by smiling. "I had a feeling this might happen," Judith said. "Martha's letter mentioned that young Mason was there, and I thought to myself, well now, if my niece has any sense at all, she will recognize a good man when she sees one. You are not upset. I came here to help you with the boarding house, and now I am saying I might need to go back to independence." "You came here to build a new life," Judith corrected. "The boarding house was just one possibility, not the only one. If your new life includes that cowboy, then I am happy for you. Lord knows you have earned some joy after losing your father." Relief flooded through Zara so powerfully that she had to blink back tears. "You are sure? I do not want to abandon you or fail to keep my commitment." "Oh, child, you are not abandoning anyone. You are choosing love and possibility, which is exactly what you should be doing. Besides, I have been managing this place alone for 5 years. I will continue to manage just fine. Although," Judith's eyes gleamed with calculation, "if you and that cowboy end up married and settled nearby, I would not say no to having family close again." They spent the evening talking about practicalities and possibilities. Judith knew of several families in Independence who needed help with various tasks, from sewing to teaching to general household management. If Zara wanted to settle in that area to be near Mason and Martha's ranch, work would be available. The boarding house would remain open to Zara if plans changed, but Judith made clear that she supported whatever choice her niece made. Life is too short and too hard to pass up real connections when you find them, Judith said firmly. You follow your heart, Zara. Everything else will work itself out. That night, lying in the boarding house's guest room, Zara composed a letter to Mason. She told him about her conversation with Aunt Judith, about the possibilities that existed for work and independence, about her certainty that she wanted to build a future with him. She poured her heart onto the page, trying to convey in words what she felt but struggling to capture the full depth of her emotions. In the end, she wrote simply, I am coming back to you. Whatever we face, we will face it together. You helped me when I needed it most, and I will keep helping you heal for as long as you will let me. I love you, Mason Hughes, and I am choosing us. She sent the letter the next morning, then spent 2 days helping Judith with various boarding house tasks while she prepared for her return journey. Her aunt insisted on packing extra supplies and gave Zara money for emergencies, along with enough advice to fill several books about managing a household and handling difficult men. Not that your Mason is difficult, Judith said, but all men require patience, and cowboys particularly so. They spend too much time alone with their thoughts, and not enough time being properly domesticated by good women. Zara laughed and promised to remember the advice. On the third morning, she saddled Daisy and began the ride back to Independence, her heart light with anticipation. The miles that had seemed so long and difficult on the journey to St. Joseph passed quickly now that she was traveling towards something instead of away from grief. She reached Martha's ranch in the early afternoon, and before she could even dismount, Mason was there. He pulled her from the saddle into his arms, holding her so tightly that Zara could barely breathe. She did not care. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him with all the love and certainty that had grown during their brief separation. You came back, Mason said against her mouth, and she could hear the wonder in his voice. I told you I would. Did you doubt me? No, maybe. I do not know. I have just spent the last week terrified that you would realize you could do better than a broken-down cowboy with too much baggage. Zara pulled back enough to look him in the eyes. You are not broken down and you are not too much. You are exactly right, Mason. For me, for this life we are going to build together. Martha emerged from the house, grinning broadly. Well, do not just stand there kissing in the yard like fools. Come inside and tell us what your aunt said. Over lunch, Zara explained everything while Mason held her hand under the table like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. She talked about Judith's support and the work possibilities in Independence, about her certainty that this was where she was meant to be. I talked to Martha while you were gone, Mason said. She offered me a permanent position managing the ranch with room and board and a fair wage. I accepted. Which means you two can court properly if that is what you want, Martha added. Zara, there is a widow in town who rents rooms to single women. Respectable arrangement, and you would be close enough to visit but far enough to maintain propriety until you two decide to marry. You have thought of everything, Zara said, overwhelmed by the older woman's generosity. I have lived long enough to know that good people finding each other is rare and precious, Martha replied. I am not about to let you two fumble your way into losing each other over details that can easily be managed. Now, are you both committed to making this work? Yes, Mason and Zara said in unison, then smiled at each other. Then we make plans and we do this properly. Mason, you court this young woman like she deserves. Zara, you keep helping that stubborn man heal while you build your own life here. And both of you remember that love takes work, but it is worth every bit of effort you put into it. The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm. Zara secured lodging with the widow Martha had mentioned, a kindly woman named Beatrice who treated her boarders like daughters. She found work helping several families with sewing and household tasks, enough to support herself while leaving time for the ranch. Mason courted her with patient determination, showing up at Beatrice's house for chaperoned visits, taking her to church on Sundays, introducing her to his few friends in the area. They spent long afternoons at Martha's ranch, working with Thunder and the other horses, talking about their pasts and their hopes for the future. Slowly, incrementally, Mason let more of his carefully guarded self show. He talked about Michael not as a source of crippling guilt, but as a beloved brother he had lost too soon. He shared memories that made him laugh instead of only ones that made him grieve. He allowed himself to plan for the future with Zara instead of living only day to day. Zara watched this transformation with joy and some pride, knowing she had played a role in helping Mason find his way back to wholeness. But she also continued building her own life, making friends in town, establishing her own identity separate from being Mason's sweetheart. She had not traveled west to lose herself in a man, even one she loved deeply. She had come to build something of her own, and she was determined to succeed. 3 months after returning from St. Joseph, Mason asked Zara to marry him. They were sitting by the creek that ran through Martha's property, watching the autumn sun paint the water gold. He had been quiet all afternoon, clearly working up to something, and when he finally turned to face her, his expression was vulnerable but certain. "I know we agreed to take things slow and court properly," he began. "But Zara, I know my heart. I know that I love you more than I thought I could love anyone after Michael died. I know that you make me want to be better, do better, live better. I know that when I think about my future, you are in every single vision. So I am asking, even though it has only been a few months, if you would consider marrying me." He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket, clearly an heirloom rather than something new. "This was my grandmother's ring. It is the only thing of value I own besides my horse and my gear. I would be honored if you would wear it." Zara felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you, Mason Hughes. I love you and I want to build a life with you." The ring slipped onto her finger perfectly, as though it had been made for her hand. Mason pulled her into his arms and kissed her with tender passion, and Zara thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. She had come west to escape grief and build something new. Instead, she had found love when her horse went lame, had been helped by a cowboy carrying his own hidden wounds, and had discovered that sometimes helping someone else heal was the key to healing yourself. They married in November, a small ceremony at Martha's ranch with just a handful of guests. Aunt Judith traveled from St. Joseph to attend, along with several of Martha's neighbors and the few friends Mason had made during his years drifting. Zara wore her mother's wedding dress that she had carried all the way from Philadelphia, while Mason wore new clothes purchased especially for the occasion, looking uncomfortable but pleased in his Sunday best. Martha cried during the ceremony and hosted a small reception afterward, with food and music and dancing under the wide prairie sky. Watching Mason smile and laugh with genuine happiness, his shadows temporarily forgotten in the joy of the day, Zara felt her heart swell with love and gratitude. They built a small cabin on Martha's property, close enough to the main house to help with ranch work but far enough for privacy. Mason proved himself a skilled carpenter, and with help from neighbors, they had a cozy home completed before the first serious snow. Zara made it beautiful with curtains and quilts, with her sewing basket in the corner and Mason's harmonica on the shelf. Life settled into contentment. Mason managed the ranch with dedicated care, proving himself invaluable to Martha's operation. Zara continued her work in town while also helping around the ranch, particularly with gentling horses. Thunder sold for a good price that fall, and the buyer specifically requested horses trained with the same patient methods, bringing repeat business. In the spring, Zara discovered she was pregnant. She told Mason one evening after supper, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. His eyes went wide with shock, then bright with tears, and then he was laughing and lifting her off her feet despite her protests. "We are having a baby," he kept repeating like he could not quite believe it. "Zara, we are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Mason said, his voice rough with emotion. "Terrified, certainly. Overwhelmed, absolutely. But happy beyond anything I thought possible. Thank you, Zara. Thank you for loving me, for believing I could heal, for giving me a future worth living." Their son was born in early winter, a healthy baby with strong lungs and his father's dark hair. They named him Michael, after the brother Mason had lost, and when Martha held him for the first time she cried with joy at the rightness of that choice. "He would have been so proud of you," Martha told Mason, her voice thick with emotion. "Your brother would have loved knowing you named your son for him, that you honored his memory by living well instead of just surviving." Mason held his son with tender amazement, his expression transformed by love and wonder. "I think maybe this is what healing looks like," he said to Zara. "Not forgetting the pain or the loss, but building something beautiful alongside it, making room for joy without diminishing the grief." Zara watched her husband cradle their baby and thought about the journey that had brought them here. A lame horse on a dusty trail, a cowboy carrying hidden wounds, two damaged people who had helped each other find wholeness. It had not been easy or simple, but it had been real and worth every difficult moment. The years passed with the steady rhythm of ranch life and raising children. Michael grew into a bright, active boy who loved horses as much as his parents did. 2 years after his birth, a daughter arrived, whom they named Sarah after Mason's mother. Then another son 3 years later, whom Judith insisted should be named after Zara's father, so they called him Thomas. Mason continued to heal, the shadows in his eyes fading though never completely disappearing. But he learned to live with his past instead of being controlled by it, to honor Michael's memory through the life he built rather than through endless grief. He became known throughout the region as a man skilled with horses and absolutely devoted to his family. Zara built her own reputation as someone who could handle any sewing project and who had a gift for teaching young women the practical skills they would need to run their own households. She took pride in her independence while also cherishing her role as wife and mother. The seamstress from Philadelphia had become a rancher's wife in Missouri, and she had never been happier. Martha lived to see all 3 of her adopted grandchildren grow into their personalities. She became the doting grandmother figure she had missed being for her own daughter's children in far-off California. When she passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72, both Mason and Zara grieved deeply for the woman who had made their life together possible. They inherited the ranch, as Martha had planned all along, and continued to build on the foundation she had established. Mason proved himself a capable manager, expanding the horse breeding operation and gaining clients throughout Missouri and Kansas. Zara managed the household and financial records while also maintaining her sewing work, finding satisfaction in balancing multiple roles. On their 10th anniversary, Mason surprised Zara by taking her back to the spot where they had first met. It took some calculation and Martha's old letters to figure out the approximate location, but eventually they found what had to be the place. The lone cottonwood tree was still there, larger now, and the endless prairie stretched in every direction just as it had that hot August day. "I was heading to Martha's ranch when I saw dust on the horizon," Mason said, holding Zara's hand as they stood in the shade of the tree. "I almost rode past because I was tired and wanted to reach shelter before dark, but something made me go investigate." "I am glad you did," Zara said. "Although at the time I was not sure whether you were help or just another problem to deal with," Mason laughed. "Fair assessment. I was not exactly welcoming that day." "No, but you were kind. Even wrapped in all your defensive walls, you took the time to help a stranger. That mattered more than you knew." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their children play nearby under the supervision of a teenage girl they had hired to help during their anniversary trip. Michael was teaching his younger siblings to identify different types of grass, a skill Mason had taught him. Sarah was collecting wildflowers to press in her journal, following her mother's example. Thomas was simply running in circles, burning off the endless energy of a 5-year-old. "Do you ever regret it?" Mason asked quietly. "Choosing this life instead of the one you planned with your aunt in St. Joseph?" "Never," Zara said firmly. "Not even on the hardest days when the children are sick or money is tight or I am exhausted beyond words. This life, this family, you. It is everything I needed even when I did not know I was looking for it. I love you, Zara Hughes. Thank you for seeing past my wounds to the person I could become. I love you too. And you did the becoming, Mason. I just helped you see it was possible." They kissed under the cottonwood tree, the same way they had kissed 100 times before and would kiss 1,000 times again. Around them, the prairie stretched endlessly toward the horizon, full of possibility and promise just as it had been 10 years earlier. Their children grew and eventually went their own ways, as children do. Michael became a veterinarian, taking his father's gift with animals and expanding it through education. Sarah married a teacher and moved to a growing town in Kansas where they opened a school together. Thomas stayed on the ranch, eventually taking over management so his parents could ease into a slower pace as they aged. Mason and Zara grew old together on the land they loved, surrounded by grandchildren who heard stories about how Grandpa helped Grandma when her horse went lame, and how Grandma helped Grandpa heal wounds he kept hidden. The stories took on the weight of family legend, told and retold until they became part of the foundation that defined their family. On warm evenings, you could still find them on the porch of the cabin they had built together so many years before. Mason would play his harmonica while Zara quilted or mended, and they would talk about their day or sit in comfortable silence while the prairie wind sang through the grass. Sometimes they spoke of Martha and how much they missed her wisdom. Sometimes they remembered Michael, the brother and namesake, keeping his memory alive through stories shared with younger generations. Sometimes they simply held hands and marveled at the life they had built from that chance meeting on a dusty trail. "You remember what you said that first day?" Mason asked one evening when they were both well into their 60s. "When I told you your mare had gone lame and you would need help." "I said a lot of things," Zara replied. "Which part do you mean?" "You said that your aunt would think something terrible had happened if you did not arrive on time. I remember thinking that something terrible had happened, but that you were handling it with more grace than most people manage." "Something wonderful happened too," Zara countered. "I just did not know it yet. That terrible thing, that delay, that interruption to my plans. It brought me exactly where I needed to be. To a broken-down cowboy with more baggage than sense. To a good man who needed someone to believe in him. To a person who understood grief and loss and was trying to find his way back to living. To the person I was meant to spend my life with, even though neither of us was looking for each other. Mason pulled Zara close, tucking her against his side where she fit perfectly after so many years of practice. I am grateful every day that you were stubborn enough not to give up on me. I am grateful every day that you were brave enough to help a stranger in need. We saved each other, Mason. That is what love does. It sees the wounds we keep hidden and says, let me help you heal. Let me carry some of that weight. Let me show you that you are worth the effort. They sat together as the sun set behind them, painting the prairie in shades of gold and crimson that never got old no matter how many times they witnessed it. Their grandchildren played in the yard while Thomas worked in the barn, and the life they had built hummed along with the steady comfort of long practice. Neither of them could know how much time remained, but they had learned not to worry overmuch about the future. They had each day, each moment, each shared breath. They had the family they created together and the land they had nurtured. They had memories enough to fill multiple lifetimes and love enough to carry them through whatever came next. Years later, when people asked about the secret to their long and happy marriage, Zara always said the same thing. He helped me when my horse went lame, and I helped him heal the wounds he kept hidden. Everything else was just building on that foundation of showing up for each other when it mattered most. Mason would add with a gentle smile, we chose each other every day. Even on the hard days, especially on the hard days, that is what commitment means. Not that love comes easily, but that you keep choosing it even when it is difficult. They lived to see their children's children grow and marry and begin families of their own. They witnessed the ranch expand and thrive, becoming known throughout the region as a place that produced exceptional horses trained with patience and understanding. They saw independence grow from a small frontier town into a proper city, though they preferred to stay on their land where the prairie wind still sang the same ancient song. When Mason passed quietly in his sleep at the age of 78, Zara grieved deeply but not hopelessly. She had learned from his own journey through grief that loss was part of loving, that the pain proved the relationship had mattered. She continued living on the ranch with Thomas and his family, spending her days with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling stories and teaching skills, and making sure everyone understood the legacy of love and healing that defined their family. She lived 5 more years, and on quiet evenings when the wind was just right, she would sit on the porch of that cabin and feel Mason's presence like he was sitting right beside her. She would think about that day so long ago when a lame horse changed both their lives, when 2 wounded people found exactly what they needed in each other. When her time finally came, surrounded by family who loved her, Zara's last thought was of Mason waiting for her just beyond sight. She imagined him standing on that endless prairie with his hand extended, ready to help her one more time. Ready to walk together into whatever came next, just as they had walked through life together for more than 50 years. Their great-granddaughter, who had been named Zara in her honor, found a letter years later tucked into one of the quilts. It was addressed to future generations, written in her great-grandmother's careful hand, and it told the whole story from beginning to end. How a cowboy helped when her horse went lame, how she helped him heal wounds he kept hidden, how they chose each other and built a life worth living. The letter ended with these words: remember that help can come from unexpected places and unexpected people. Remember that everyone carries wounds, some visible and some hidden, and that healing is always possible given patience and love. Remember that the best things in life often begin with difficulties that force us to ask for help or offer it to others. And remember that true love is not about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone willing to grow and heal and build something beautiful together. We were not perfect, your great-grandfather and I, but we were perfect for each other. That made all the difference. The letter became another part of the family legend, passed down through generations along with the ranch, and the stories and the values that Mason and Zara had built their life around. Their descendants continued to breed horses with patience and understanding, to value kindness and healing, to believe that love was worth the effort it required. And sometimes, on warm evenings when the prairie wind sang through the grass just right, you could almost hear the sound of a harmonica playing old melodies. You could almost see two figures sitting together on a porch that no longer existed, holding hands and watching the sunset. You could almost feel the presence of a love that had lasted beyond death, that had built something so strong and beautiful, it echoed through generations. Because that is what happens when two people who need healing find each other at exactly the right moment. When help is offered and accepted and returned. When wounds long hidden are finally given light and air and the patient tending they require. What began with a lame horse on a dusty trail became a love story that shaped an entire family, a testament to the power of showing up for each other when it matters most. Mason and Zara never knew their story would be remembered and retold for so many years. They were simply trying to live well, to love fully, to heal the hurts they carried and build something lasting together. But that is often how the best love stories work. They are not about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. They are about two people choosing each other day after day, helping each other through difficulties large and small, believing in each other even when belief is hard. They are about a cowboy who stopped to help a stranded woman when he could have ridden past. About a woman brave enough to see past defensive walls to the wounded man beneath. About two people who discovered that sometimes the greatest gift we can give or receive is simply showing up, being present, offering the kind of help that goes deeper than practical assistance into the realm of genuine caring. That kind of help, that kind of love, that kind of commitment to another person's healing and wholeness. That is what built the life Mason and Zara shared. That is what allowed them to thrive despite grief and loss and all the difficulties that came their way. That is what made their ordinary story into something extraordinary worth remembering. And in the end, that is what love is meant to be. Not perfect or easy, but real and committed and willing to do the hard work of healing together. A cowboy helped her when her horse went lame. She helped him heal the wounds he kept hidden. Together, they built something beautiful that lasted long after they were gone, a legacy of love that proved again and again that showing up for each other is the greatest gift we can ever give.